Howdy howdy, Sir Devil here. In this episode of Faction Focus, we're going to take a look at the Dwarf Lords, as well as the heroes. Specifically, we're going to look at different combinations of abilities and different scenarios to see which ones rise to the top. Really, we want to look at how do our lords and heroes do up against an enemy lord, how do they do up against a unit of infantry, and how do they affect our own units, and what can they do to help make our army better. To give you an idea of the ability sets we're going to look at, we'll just go through them quickly. Now with Thorgrim, one of the abilities that I think is a bit of a red herring is this one here, which is High King. It's really worth noting that it only activates if the leadership of Thorgrim is very low, if he's getting really hammered, and it just isn't a very good ability, and it's one of those things that even though it's pretty cheap, you do need to think about. And if you played other games where you have buffs or passives that are basically contingent on a set of parameters before they activate, they tend to be very unreliable and not very good, and this is the case with this High King ability. The other ones, Foe Seeker, Deadly Onslaught, and Stand Your Ground, are mostly for his ability to handle a one-on-one combat, though Stand Your Ground I think has a lot more benefits because of that 45 meter range. And the other one, which is fantastic, is a Great Book of Grudges, which gives him +8 melee attack. Now I looked at Thorgrim in two flavors, one where he's going to be tough in melee at this 2265 gold level, and then another where I removed these abilities and put him down to 1900 just to see what he would do buffing our units and see if he could still handle some melee combat. With Ungrim, did the same thing, though I took this one out, the Death Blow. It's again one of those contingent abilities that you got to watch out for, and of course gave him the Axe of Dargo, which is really strong. And I didn't look at him in any other configuration, because really if you're taking Ungrim, you're specifically looking to beat down other lords or big enemy units. Finally, I looked at just the basic lord, and I figured if you're going to take him, you're going to want the cheapest version. You have other reasons to want to try him in your army. So I thought I'd just put him through his paces to see how he would stand up. As far as the heroes go, the engineer I didn't look at all. I had looked at him before in one of my previous videos, and if you want to watch that, you can see he's basically he's not useless, but he's very weak, and I can't see any configuration, any type of army where he's going to be effective. Now, if you want to have a fun game where you have a lot of ranged units, he might be fun to have in there, but otherwise he's really quite weak. I also looked at the Thane, and the Thane has really come on since the patch. These abilities, Foe Seeker and Deadly Onslaught, can definitely be worth it. It really is a matter of choice. But the two key things that the Thane has now are these potions. The Potion of Toughness, which replenishes your hit points, and this Potion of Healing. They can really allow your Thane for a very reasonable 749 gold to tank out a ton of damage and to be reasonably effective, and we'll see what his numbers look like. The last hero we looked at is a Runesmith. Now, if you've been watching any online battles, the Runesmith is showing up in every single dwarf army. You probably already know right now he's pretty fantastic. This Forge Fire doesn't seem to be worth it ever, but these other abilities, 15 armor, this Rune of Wrath and Ruin can be effective, especially against vampires, but it's hard to say. You really gotta choose when you're going to use it, and this 44% damage resistance can be fantastic, and this is specifically when your opponent is using abilities or the charge is coming in or something like that. I think this is one of the necessary tools for the Runesmith, but Some people think it takes a little bit too long with a 90-second cooldown, but I think it's definitely worth having in general for really trying to deal with spikes in damage. If a good example is if your enemy is going to throw a big spell at you, like I can't think of the one, but it's a vampire spell where they basically mow down a whole line of infantry. This can really help reduce a lot of that damage. The key abilities are actually in your items, and this one here, the Master Rune of Stromny Redbeard, is fantastic. Leadership and melee attack, and it really is a must-have. It makes your units much, much better. This 8 leadership, I don't think it's required for the dwarfs. Now, if you want to have a weakish army, meaning a lot of miners and dwarf warriors, it might be useful, but I think this is generally going to be a waste, because I've seen dwarf warriors fight down to the last man almost and still keep fighting. But this one here, the 20% missile resistance, can be very, very good if you're going to be fighting someone like Bretonia, where they might have a lot of archers, and you can reduce that. But this is really something you have to think about when you're putting your runesmith together. Anyways, let's get to some of the tests, and we'll look at the data that we've gathered. As I stated, the very first test I ran them all through was basically a one-on-one fight with Grimgor Ironhide, and I used Grimgor because he is a very, very strong melee lord, and I thought if we want to compare the numbers and have something reasonable to take a look at, let's go against what is probably going to be our toughest one-on-one battle. I basically ran each scenario 5 times and took the data. As some testing I've done before, if you've seen my channel, I looked at the start time and end time to find out how much time they fought for, the end hit points Grimgor had, the end hit points Thorgrim had, and calculated the DPS from there, and then the number of wins. Now, when we get down to the final data, understand these are all averages over the set of 5, and it came out to be pretty interesting. Thorgrim, when he was amped up with all his melee abilities, was pretty effective one-on-one, and I think that has a lot to do with this big hit point pool he has and very good melee defense. Now, he had a 100% win rate against Grimgor, and he had a few closer battles, but if you look at the DPS, Grimgor was doing 42.5, and Thorgrim was doing 42.4, which are both very close, but Thorgrim just has a lot more hit points. And this is a really big plus for Thorgrim at all levels, is that hit point pool and good melee defense. When I took away some of his abilities and brought down the cost quite a bit, the time of the battles went up, and the win rate for Thorgrim went down to 40%. He still won a couple of battles, and what was really interesting was if Thorgrim could DPS down Grimgor before he got his second shot with his big abilities, he could actually win that. Otherwise, he would lose. When we go to Ungrim, as expected, at a cost of 2009, even though his hit points are lower, the battles were very, very short at 68 seconds, and he won 100% of his battles. They were very, very decisive. Now, when we go and look at the Lord, it wasn't even a competition. He got crushed every single time. The Thane was really interesting. Even though the Thane had a 0% win rate, the amount of time the battle lasted for was just over 3 minutes, and that really says a lot. Like, your Thane being able to hold up an enemy lord for 3 minutes while the rest of your army does something is really significant. Yeah, he's not going to win that battle, but he can definitely have an impact by tying up one of the enemy lords for a very long time at a cost of 749 gold. If you look at being able to hold up Grimgor, who is 2108 for 749 gold, that's a fantastic trade. Also, the runesmith, as expected, don't get him into melee. You know, he got absolutely whipped in 43 seconds by Grimgor, and he did hardly any damage to him at all. You might want to use a runesmith as a secondary attacker in some cases, or throw him into a pile of weak units just to tank them out if you have to, or really you're saving him until you have to use him at the end of the game. You want him for his buffs, but otherwise your runesmith is not going to do much. And again, didn't look at the engineer. You can look at one of my previous videos to see why the engineer is just so weak. Now I did have a quick look, and I didn't do a full test of Thorgrim, Ungren, and Arthane against a unit of big guns just to see how they would stand up. And this is the lower tier version of Thorgrim. And if you look, Thorgrim actually lost to the unit of big guns. Ungrim beat them, though he did get hurt. And the Thane, which again surprising, was fantastic. He tanked them out, and at the end of the battle, after his second healing potion, he had all of his hit points left. So this Thane really can do some work when he's tanking out melee units, and I think is something to always keep in mind when you're choosing your army. The next set of tests I did were to look at how big of a difference that +8 melee attack buff makes to your units. And I basically looked at an unbuffed state to get a baseline, and then added buffs sequentially to get my final data, which ended up being very interesting. So when we look at the Longbeards versus the big guns, unbuffed, being very, very close in gold output, you'd expect the battles to be close, and they were. The Longbeards won only 2 of the battles, which are about 40%, and you know, it's kind of what you'd expect, those 2 units going up against each other. Now when we added that +8 melee buff, things changed pretty substantially. The Longbeards won every single battle. Now, some of them were a little bit closer than others, but their DPS went up pretty significantly from 25 to 32, which is really significant. You've basically taken a fight that is going to go one way or the other, depending on where the charge comes off or if there's any other buffs, to something that's going to be a lot more dependable with just that +8 melee buff. Now, I kind of continued on. I wanted to see what the difference would be if we added in the runesmith's additional +8 melee buff. And if we look at here, again, the Longbeards, of course, won every battle, but they won them all very convincingly. This first battle took on average 300 seconds, the second one 250, and this last one 220. So you're looking at saving basically from the unbuffed state to the 16 +16, you know, a whole minute, and you're going to win it pretty decisively and have a lot of HP left to play with when you get that unit out of there. So that is a really, really significant buff to your army, and I think it's one of the things that puts Thorgrim over the top when it comes to the comparison of Thorgrim versus Ungrim. Now, I thought if we can do this to Longbeards, which are one of the well, they're the best dwarf infantry unit, and I'll get to that in one of my essential units, but I thought, well, if they can do that to Longbeards, what can they do to dwarf warriors? Can they bring them up to the level where they'll be competitive with big guns? So I kept on testing and looked at dwarf warriors, and the definitive answer is nope. The big guns absolutely mop the floor with them. So you can't take it that far, but you know, you can definitely get some good results. Now, if you've been listening along to this video and, you know, this tiny little channel up until now, here is one of the gems. I continued testing a lot of different configurations, and I more or less stumbled across something that I think is really wonderful. It's awesome. I was testing against Black Orcs, and I thought, what is this +16 melee buff going to do to my two-handed units? So I went back to the good old faithful Longbeards and ran them up against the Black Orcs, and they won 60% of the battles against the Black Orcs. Now, Black Orcs, everyone knows they punch above their weight. They're a fantastic unit. They're hard to stop. But if we look at this data set, which I think is stunning actually, we have Longbeards with great weapons at a cost of 750 being absolutely competitive against the Black Orcs, which are, well, they're not 700, they're 1100. But I think that's a little gem. So when you're setting up your armies and you're looking at that double melee buff, really I think kind of your ace in the hole could be a couple extra units of those longbeards with great weapons, because they are going to be competitive with black orcs. They definitely have the leadership, and they give your other units leadership buff. So I think this is a kind of a game changer when you look at how effective a dwarf army can be when looking at other units. So the gem is longbeards with great weapons with that double +8 melee buff are just devastating and very, very cost effective. So what's the conclusion? I think it's pretty clear. If you really want to optimize your dwarf army, Thorgrim is definitely the choice. This is not to say that Ungrim here isn't viable. He's a fantastic damage dealer, and if that's your playstyle, you might even get better results using Ungrim than Thorgrim. It's just when you look at the army as a whole, with Thorgrim, I think you're generally going to get better results. Now, what you're going to do down here is going to depend. I think this stand your ground might be a must-have. It is on a long cooldown and does cost a lot, but it really can help Thorgrim tank out some damage and your surrounding units. So this is definitely, I think, worth considering, but absolutely you need this +8 melee attack buff. Now, if we look at our Rune Priest, Warhammer Online, still in my head, your Rune Smith, again, another essential unit for this buff right here, +8 melee attack and leadership, and he's definitely flexible. You can add well, not the leadership, but that missile resistance. If you think you're going to come up against a lot of archers, you can look at adding that 15 armor. It's definitely cost effective at 74 gold. You can look at the Rune of Wrath and Ruin. It can be very effective, but it is pretty situational. But really, I think having him in here is a must. Now, the Thane is maybe not essential, but is a very, very strong unit, especially when you have these 2 potions on him. And you can make him quite a bit better in melee if you want to give him these 2 buffs. Now, Foe Seeker is nothing to sniff at. Vigor is really important for dwarfs, and if you look at some of my previous videos, you'll see why. But this Deadly Onslaught can definitely make a difference, because when you're going to be fighting for 2 or 3 minutes against an enemy lord, that extra damage can definitely add up. But his ability to tank out a whole unit is at 749 gold is very, very valuable. I don't know if you'd want more than 2, but definitely 1 is worth a look. So I hope you found that information interesting, and we'll see you soon.